Welcome back to Buckle Up, an ultra running conversation with Simon and Brian. How are you today, Simon?
I'll be honest, I'm kind of bored. I didn't race this weekend. I didn't race last weekend. I don't know what to do with myself anymore. I think I'm supposed to train or something like that. It's painful to train. But how about yourself, Brian? How are your knees?
My knees are good. I'm saving them a little bit, Simon. I was just telling you before we hit the record button that I've been getting on my bicycle just a tad bit, maybe once or twice a week, just to kind of offset some of the running miles as I ease back into full training mode for Leadville. For me, that's my next event. So I got about 10 weeks before Leadville, and my knees are good. I'm saving them though, so that's where I'm going with the bike thing.
Yeah,
How
no,
about yourself?
and
How about you, Simon? How are your knees?
my knees are fine. And honestly, for me, I think what's exciting is that it's finally coming. We're making a switch from the annoying desert race that are too hot to finally mountain race, and I gotta get my legs to running status, power hiking status for the mountain, which what it means is I did my first strength session in probably 6 weeks. I think it was 3 days ago, and I'm still feeling it. So I was due for it. I was postponing a little bit because of the racing, and boy, that was painful and challenging, but important.
It's definitely important, but it sounds like maybe you could use a little bit of structure in there and maybe kind of get some guidelines on the specifics. I'm not sure what kind of strength workout you did the other day, but to be sore 3 days later might have been a little too much or a little too heavy, or it might have been the wrong setup. But either way, our guest, Will Frantz, today is going to share with us some strength training secrets, maybe not even secrets, but some strength training successes and how to structure some of our training.
Yeah, I think it was a really interesting conversation. I didn't know Will before this conversation, but it's clear that his strength training session comes from or come for an ultra or endurance mindset. It's not about, first of all, it's not about losing weight. It's not about bulking up. It's about being functional, both on trail, but also in your day-to-day life. So I really liked his approach, and his approach also seems to be very, very geared or very crafted with science or evidence-based kind of training technique in mind, which I think is very important, is to stay up to date as to what is the best way to achieve the goal that your athlete is looking for. And then he's able to guide his athletes through that.
Yeah, Will and I have been following each other on social media for quite a long time now, quite honestly. And we met our first time last year at the UESCA Ultra Running Coaching Conference in Colorado Springs. So we hung out all weekend and shared stories, and finally got to connect in person. And we've since connected a couple times thereafter. One at Javelina 100. He was hanging out in our tent. We were crewing, we were crewing yourself and some other runners, and he had some other athletes himself at Javelina. And he stopped in Glenwood, in my town, and we had coffee before as he's coming through Denver to Salt Lake City, where he lives currently. And I live right on the corridor, so he stopped in and had some coffee. We had coffee and shared some stories as well. So, yeah, Will's a great guy. He's really knowledgeable in all things endurance and the strength and conditioning aspect specifically. And I really appreciate his take and his conversation today. Without further ado, Will Frantz. Welcome to the show, Will. Thanks for coming on this afternoon. How are you doing?
Doing well, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm recovering well. Simon and I were just talking about the last couple events that we just participated in and how we're recovering.
Good.
And it's going pretty good.
Awesome, man. Glad you're recovering from all of that as well as you can be, for running too far.
Yeah, it's always too far, right?
That's all we do. It's all we do.
Hey, Will, I wanted to kick things off. I wanted to introduce you to our 12 listeners. I think we've gone up from 10 to 12 this time. And I wanted to introduce you to our 12 listeners and just get a feel for how you got into this space, how you got into ultra running. You're a personal trainer at a gym, and you're doing like the strength and conditioning type of stuff. I see a lot of that stuff on social media. And I'll even back up a step and say that we started following each other on social media before we ever met, because we kind of live in that same space. I think it was maybe through USCA initially,
Maybe,
um,
yeah.
but we, but we shared some of the same type of content, and we just connected. I think I feel like it was a common thread of information that we are putting out, and so we connected there. And then we also then we eventually met in person at the USCA coaching conference, and we've connected after a couple times after as well. So
Yeah, man. Background. So the strength stuff is a lot longer than the other stuff, or like sports stuff in general. The ultra running is pretty new. I've always been I would call like a mediocre athlete from a really young age. My father was a physical therapist. He was a like multiple state time champion, national contender wrestling in college. So like just an active human being. And so from I don't know 10, taught me how to lift, taught me how to move weight around. And just always a thing that's been kind of a thing in my life. Didn't like running, though. I thought it was for insane people. I still do. I just do it now, and I've joined the ranks of the insane people. And if we look more at that, so I was living in Korea for a while. I used to play a ton of ultimate frisbee. When I got back from teaching English in Korea, I chose to work at a ski resort for a couple years, and as much as I really enjoyed that, I didn't like night shift. I was driving snowcats, so I was awake in the middle of the night, and I was just like trying to figure out what else I wanted to do with my life that might be positive. And I decided to go the personal training route, and that was late 2019, and then the apocalypse happened, and kind of put a ton of dampers on many things. But somebody I was dating at the time, her dad was an ultra runner. And so I worked the final aid station at a trail race up here that is defunct. It no longer happens, but helped with the aid station for most of the day. And you just see people come through, and it was both incredibly inspiring and also just like they hadn't eaten in 20 or 30 miles because they didn't know how to do like basic fueling stuff. That's a struggle for all of us, right? So I kind of got into it that direction by talking to some of the local community about just like food and how to fuel and how to not bonk while trying to run whatever that was, 46 miles or whatever that race used to be. And then just accidentally fell in love with it myself. Like I just discovered one of the things I really loved about snowboarding was not necessarily the snowboarding, but being alone in the woods for really long periods of time. And trail running is a really great way to be alone in the woods for really long periods of time. So I do that. I don't do a ton of races. It's not a thing that necessarily draws me to the sport, but being out in the woods and the mountains, like going uphill, going downhill really fast, I enjoy it a lot. And then my day job is both of them are my day job, but I coach runners online, and then I coach people in person who come to the gym. I work at the Salt Lake Tennis Club, and I tell people to lift weights and pick up things and put them down again and get stronger. And that covers anybody from like, I think I have the range of like 20 to 80-year-olds on my roster at the moment. It's just helping people get stronger and be safer throughout their life. So that's kind of the somewhat short bulleted version of that.
I'm curious, your work at the gym. So would you say the primary goal is for people to get stronger? Is it more aesthetic? Is it more weight loss? I'm sure there's different goals, but maybe you specialize in something.
Yeah, there's different goals. I'm not great at talking about the fat loss thing, partially because I have a somewhat complicated version or history of it myself. So it's just kind of a tough conversation sometimes. And then we're happy to go into that if you want. I know there's a lot of like crossover in this community with that, but further, a lot of the time, if you're looking for weight loss, it's going to happen at your house, and you can only provide so much guidance for that. It's like, eat a little better, do these things, walk more, don't sit at your desk for 10 hours straight every day. That kind of stuff is what tends to lead to sustainable fat loss. So I just focus more on strength, and then they tend to send the endurance athletes to me. If somebody is going to go do a 50 miler, they shoot them my direction because I do that. Everybody knows I do that crazy stuff. So that's kind of me. But yeah, runs the gamut, really. From health for someone in her 80s trying to improve the risk of osteoporosis to athletes training for things to just some injury stuff.
Cool. Yeah, no, I'm asking just because I'm curious. Do you have also, there's a trend definitely lately with the hybrid athlete. Do you have anyone like that?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, a couple. It's more me pulling teeth of already people who love cardio who try to get them to lift weights and or vice versa. But
good luck with me.
yeah, but I would qualify myself kind of in that category, and there's a couple other people in that category, but for the most part, people tend to stick in their one spot or the other until they get hurt, and then they realize they need to do the other thing. So yeah.
Well, I mean, we've talked a little bit about it indirectly in another episode. I think it's almost contradicting itself if you're trying to bulk up or kind of change your body composition and try to work on endurance. To me, they're kind of different goals, and you might want to focus on one at a time. Doesn't mean you can't do both in your yearly cycle, but I see it as being pretty difficult to manage both. But maybe you have tips for the audience.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It is hard to manage both, and I think it kind of depends, like what your long term goal is. Like you have a guy like Bruce Lee, for example. He was 135 pounds and stronger than I am. You're not necessarily trying to get jacked. You're trying to get strong, right? So that's actually an important distinction to where you don't have to put on a ton of muscle mass to get stronger. And there's a large percentage of people who just don't have the strength they need to do the stuff they want to do safely, right? So that's the one thing there. And then the other is, yeah, to some degree, they are somewhat contradictory. If you're trying to be Walmsley or Kipchoge or any of these people who are making a very large percentage of their paycheck from running, then it probably really matters if you put on an extra pound of shoulder mass. For most people, they don't make nearly enough money from this sport to justify putting that off, because as you get older, it's really hard to gain muscle mass. And as someone who trains people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, I've never met a single one of them who wish they were weaker. Right? So it's having some long-term vision. It's kind of like if you're a sedentary person and probably shouldn't eat nothing but candy all day long, like vegetables are good for you, even though they might not be the best thing in the world. Kind of same with lifting. It's good for you, even though it might not be your favorite thing in the world.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, there's definitely room for strengthening. There's no question there that a lot of running injuries are related to not having the strength in your muscle to absorb the shock, and then it goes to your joint and your tendon. That's for sure. And I agree with you. I think there's both extreme. I would be curious to see, those extreme endurance athletes, how they end up old and what's their health issue, because we already know they might have cardiac arrhythmia and things like that. On the flip side, you have people in bodybuilding who die at 35. To be fair, they might be injecting with stuff, but they're, both extreme are probably not necessarily the healthiest, and then finding the in between, which is doing some strength session but also some cardio, at least for me, I think it's the healthiest mindset. But like you say, we stay in our lane. I did my strengthening session, I think 2 days ago, just for my legs. Okay, I never do upper body, as is pretty obvious. I still feel it. I had been postponing it for a while. Let's just say it like that. So
that's fair. Yeah, man.
Yeah.
I think you said they might be injecting something. Everybody on a bodybuilding stage, for the most part, is injecting something. So yeah, 100%. There's a reason why there's a problem on either end there. But yeah, like it's I think most people just want to be in this middle ground, right? And that's kind of what we got to look at and what really matters.
I think Simon's onto something, and I want to touch on it. As humans, I'm also the same way. Like I really have a hard time doing the strength training. I love running. Running's my thing. It's my first choice, right? But I also work with athletes where they're more comfortable in the gym than they are out running, right? So that's their first choice as well. And so, they have these goals. They want to do, certain events or distances or push their limits in the endurance world. But the first thing they do every day is go to the gym, and then maybe they get the running, right? So I'm always trying to like change that narrative a little bit, or at least just kind of maybe make it more equal, or focus on the goal. So how do you deal with that, Will? Do you see that as well?
Not a lot, to be very honest. Like especially people who hire me to like help them run an ultra, it's pretty few and far between where I'm having to convince those people to go run. And if I'm going to be honest, I've probably talked more people out of running an ultra than into it. Because if you don't want to be running for 6, 7, 8 hours in the woods and you can't even get in a 30-minute run on a fairly regular basis, then maybe this isn't the sport for you. And that's okay. Like, so that's kind of a conversation I have with people. Because it's hard and it's a big commitment and you're going to be running a lot. If you don't want to be running a lot, then maybe running ultras isn't your jam. But
Yeah,
I also, I don't see it a
that's a
lot.
pretty fair and honest conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, but I also don't see it a lot. Like, I don't tend to see people who like always get in the gym every week and then want to run super far. So if it did,
Yeah, Brian,
I'd definitely have that conversation though. I agree with you entirely. Like, you need to do the running. You're trying to run a thing.
yeah, I think for me, what's interesting is I used to, I was never bulky, but I was definitely stronger at some point in my life. And I remember going to the gym and I could lift and do weights for an hour and a half, and time would just fly. And then I would go do my cardio, 15 minute, 20 minute. That sound like it took forever. And now it's the opposite. Like even just, yeah, 2 days ago, I was doing my weight training and it felt like I had been at the gym for hours. Then I look at my time and it's like, it's been 20 minutes. I was like, that's enough time. Let's go run now. And then you go for an hour and a half and the time just flies and my brain disconnects. I think maybe you just need to force it until it becomes natural and then you don't even think about it. I don't know, because for me it's 180-degree and I don't know how I made the transition, but I can't lift anymore. It's just so boring to me. Let's say it. It's just so boring. And I used to think that about running, like, wow, you're running for an hour, like, wow, that's boring,
Yeah,
So
that's fair, man. I mean, it's some of it might be your programming. Some of it might be, yeah, it's just kind of boring, and that's okay. But yeah, I think not everybody's going to be attracted to the same stuff. I find like the elliptical makes me want to kill myself. So it's not a thing that I would ever really use for cross training. I find it super boring. Other people love it. So yeah, I just think it's kind of like finding your modalities and what works well is also part of it.
yeah.
Hey, Will, so you gave us the rundown about your introduction into the endurance world, and so where are you at with that now? Like, you don't race that much, you said, and that's fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Obviously, I think you're just enjoying the space. But do you still find yourself in the gym quite a bit, or maybe like percentage wise, is it like a 60-40, 70-30, kind of like where are you at in the space between ultra running and your weight training in the gym?
Good question. I'm in the gym at least 5 days a week because I work there. Over the past couple months, I've been in more of a strength cycle. I have some level of litany of injuries from stupid sports things that were not related to injury or running. So I've been doing a bit of a strength cycle to correct some of that stuff. And now we're down to like lifting 2 days a week and then running 5 or 6.
Okay, yeah. I mean, that's a reasonable amount for an ultra runner. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of where we are. And I'm trying to do a big build. I'm looking at some stuff next year down the line. And I need to get better at going up mountains because I like going up mountains. I'm just really bad at it. So I need to spend time doing that.
That's surprising. I would think, with your strength in lifting, I would think that power hiking would be kind of your key strength, actually.
Yeah, it's not too bad. It's the cardio. The cardio kind of sucks. It takes forever to build. I haven't been running that long. I had a really bad, like, deviated septum and not a full nasal passage until I got surgery at 19. And then they could only correct it to 50%. And then I still have pretty bad asthma that's like, didn't realize how bad it was until a year ago. And now that I'm on medication, it's like, oh, this is kind of what normal people feel like when they breathe. But as a result, it's been a slow build. So that's kind of why I suck. It's never the legs. It's always I can't breathe.
Will, I wanted to touch a little bit about your experiences in the gym, and I wanted to see if you had some suggestions for our listeners, all 12 of them, about what they could do. I mean, it's hard to say, right? Because all our training and weight training is really specific to individuals. But if you had 5 exercises for a healthy person that didn't have any ailments and was of sound health and was looking to get stronger or better, well-rounded as an athlete, what kind of exercises do you think they could be doing?
As you said, this is a tough thing to answer, and some of it is, I think, like with any coaching or training or whatever, there is a large gap between fine and really good, right? Like there's plenty of training programs on the internet that are fine. They'll probably get you across the finish line. And then like working with a pretty good coach will have you do that the best you can. So anything we talk about here is probably going to go into that fine category. But if we look at like 5 categories of movements that we can try and hit on a weekly basis and probably be better off. First is going to be what we call a hinge. This might be a deadlift, and a movement that I have a lot of runners do is a sumo deadlift, because a lot of the time we're spending so much time going in this very same plane that we're just not used to what we call hip abduction, right? Hip abduction is when you like pull your knee out to the side. Imagine it that way. And so your glute med, or the side of your butt, is often kind of weak. And when it's kind of weak, then your knee can fall in. And this is some of the contributing factors to things like IT band, friction syndrome, or various forms of knee pain, or high hamstring tendinopathy, or any of this shit. If you have this like knee valgus that's constantly happening, if your knee is constantly falling, then we're usually going to end up with some kind of pain. And a sumo deadlift can be a really helpful way to fix that. And it's not just me. It's also like Jason Koop thinks is one of the dumber exercises on the planet. But the little band tube walks where you put the band around your knees and move back and forth. You run up mountains, like you're probably stronger than a rubber band, if we're going to be honest. So we need to like actually pick something up that creates a meaningful stimulus. And while keeping your knees out in a deadlift, picking weight up off the ground is a great way to like force a ton of weight through your glute med and like create hip abduction. So high on my list for a lot of people to do. And that it would be a hinge. Anything where you're mostly moving from the hips is a like hinge pattern. And sumo deadlift is pretty good. I'd prescribe it to like 70 or 80% of runners a lot of the time, at least some point during their year. And next, stick on the lower body, because I know that's what everybody cares about, would be a squat pattern. So if a hinge is where you just fold from the hips, a squat, you move your knees and your hips at the same time. We know what a squat looks like. That's what distinguishes it from a hinge. So a squat that tends to be really good for a lot of runners, especially a lot of trail runners, because they tend to be pretty strong in their legs, is what we might call a Bulgarian split squat, or a rear foot elevated split squat. And if you hear an Eastern Bloc country in the name of any exercise, it always means it's probably going to be pretty miserable. Like that's just a standard that we can take. Romanian deadlifts, Bulgarian split squats, they just tend to be a lot. And Bulgarian split squat, you put your back, you stand on one leg, you put your back foot up, and then you come down until pretty much that back knee comes down to ground. And there's tons of videos, including a couple that I've made on the internet of this. And there are better ways to do this than others. And if we want to get really nitpicky about it, we can. But if we look up a Bulgarian split squat, I think it's a really good pairing to the sumo deadlift, because the sumo deadlift, like you're using both legs at the same time. So a single-sided squat motion can be really helpful. And you can also load it incredibly heavily. Like once you finally get the pattern down and you get the stability, which all these things work with, it also is a movement that sprinters do this a lot, because you're like right in that final stage of gait cycle where your entire foot's on the ground, but your knee is really far forward over your toes, and you can drive a lot of force through the ground, right? So you can load this really heavy. And so that would be another one that we could knock in there. Next would be like the push category, and we can subdivide this into two things. Either a horizontal, like straight out from you, think bench press or push up, or an overhead press. And if I had to pick one for somebody, it would probably be an like incline bench press at like 35 or 45 degrees, because it hits a little bit of both. It hits the shoulder function. Mm-hmm. If I knew more about the person, I would probably have them do an overhead press, because this is where we tend to be weak. This tends to be a thing that really helps us throughout our life. Put bags into overhead compartments and everything, play with our kids, pick up our grandkids over our head. Any of these things is really useful. But I worry about prescribing overhead presses to people I can't see, because if we can't create this like shoulder extension over the head, then this can actually be a somewhat dangerous position. If we're only able to get to like here and not to here, then this can actually like cause problems. So being some kind of like incline bench press will hit a bit of your chest, will hit a bit of your arms, will hit your shoulder a little bit, and keep that stability, with the idea that we might be working back towards an overhead press. And then complement to the push would be a pull. And same idea here. We can do a vertical or a horizontal version of this. I think pull-ups are a great exercise. I have a bar behind my head. I think they're fantastic, partially because they include no weight. They're also really hard to do a good pull-up. So I actually think a lot of runners could do with what we might consider a row, where you bend over, you put your hand and your knee up on a bench or a counter or whatever, and we just pull back here. And we're really trying to keep the shoulder blade down, chest up, and pull back, kind of in that motion. And a lot of runners end up in kind of this posture, especially trail runners, because we have a pack on our back a lot. We just kind of end up here. And if we do some decent rows, we get that upper back engagement. Your scapula move better. You're able to breathe better. Your cardio will work better. You're a little more stable. We don't end up in our low back as much. We're able to keep a little better posture. We're not trying to be ramrod upright. We're just trying to be here while we run. But if we're here, we tend to like shut our lungs off a little bit. So row can be really helpful for that. And then number 5 would be some kind of ab thing, whatever you're bad at. If you're pretty bad at planks, probably be a plank, because it creates a lot of stability and it's really easy to do. I think a lot of people are fairly good at planks, so we'd probably do some kind of rotation thing. Your obliques work with literally every step you run. Like your hips need to move when you run. So if they can't move or you can't control that motion, then we want to create that control. So some kind of like rotational oblique motion can be really helpful, like separating the upper body from the lower body. So 5, I think that's 5. Sumo deadlift, Bulgarian split squat, incline bench press, a row, and then an oblique twist.
Yeah, those are great. I think that's a great list for sure.
Yeah. And we could get nitpicky about all of them, depending on you and your movement proclivities. Like I actually wouldn't prescribe a few of those for me. I played side-to-side sprinting sports for many years. Sumo deadlifts actually like reinforce a movement pattern that I'm already pretty good at. So I would want to like counterbalance that with something else. But for most people, that would be a pretty good list of 5.
Sure, and they're variable as well, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be sumo deadlifts. It could be some other variation of deadlift. It could be some other variation of a split squat of some sort, or single leg squat, or a pistol squat, or whatever it might be. It doesn't have to be Bulgarian and super challenging. And maybe once you nail the Bulgarian, you could move on to a different squat as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Got the idea for sure.
Yeah, those are great, Will. I think those would be really helpful for the everyday athlete, general population. And again, just like you said, it's taken with a grain of salt. It's for a mass population. The specifics would be learning about somebody's history with sport, learning about their range of motion, and trying to figure out exactly what's the best course of action for that particular athlete.
Yeah, 100%. I think if we're going to get a little more nitpicky about some of these too, like we talked about why hip abduction matters. I think one thing that tends to be underplayed in a lot of a lot of runners in general, but especially like road runners who end up going to trail, is hamstrings tend to be proportionally weak because they don't work a lot on the flats. And then we end up on trails, and your hamstrings actually do a ton to slow you down. We all know that they burn out your, like the descents burn out your quads. Part of the reason they burn out your quads is that a lot of runners don't have very strong hamstrings. So if we can build stronger hamstrings, then we don't get quite as much quad fatigue on the downhill. So either a like seated hamstring curl is just the easiest way to make that happen. You can throw a ton of weight on it. You can't really screw it up. Or like a Romanian deadlift or something, but that can also be hamstring would be a good thing to hit as well.
I just read a couple articles about most recently at Cocodona, we had a fair amount of participants that had the ultra lean. They were completely sideways over, and because there was this conflicting story about what exactly is going on there, and I'll get to the point here in a second, I promise. But there's always this conflicting issue about like what's going on with that lean, right? Sometimes it's to the left, sometimes it's to the right. The athlete doesn't know why it's happening. But initially, I thought I read that it was an electrolyte imbalance, but most recently, I've been reading that it's a weakness in the core and abdomen area. So your fifth suggestion of core work, I don't know if I'd put it fifth. I think it might need to be bumped up to the top of the list as being, basically a basic everyday, maybe every other day type of approach for some core work and some stability work in that core area. Because again, like you said, we use it so much in everything we do for running. It's the trunk twisting, and once it gets lazy and tired, it could also be the reason that we're seeing a lot of these athletes with the ultra lean. What do you think?
I think it's a good point. I will say, as far as like everyday strength training, if you were training something every day and you are able to train something every day, you probably need to train it harder and train it less often. Like your abs are a muscle just like your legs are. If you're doing 200 sit-ups, then we probably need to find a harder movement because that's not working for you, right? Like that's the same idea of like trying to get stronger legs from doing 300 step-ups. It's not a good use of your time. So I think we could probably program a little better. That said, I absolutely think that's what's going on there. I don't know why an electrolyte imbalance would necessarily lead you to like problems on one side or the other. I think there usually is like some kind of core imbalance, and depending on the person, it could be coming from either the back or the front, or I mean the side. But like muscles kind of start either here and pull around, or here and go that way. So it could be coming usually either from the back or the front, but exactly what's going on there is a tough thing to say. But yeah, I think core work would be useful. And if we are seeing a lot of that tilt, one that I didn't mention, but would be a really good thing in replacement for that oblique twist or something like that, would just be a simple suitcase carry. You pick up something really heavy in one hand, try to keep a fairly like upright posture, and then walk and stay stable. And that will work a lot of that stability engagement, and you'll probably see an imbalance side to side if you're a person who ends up on the lean train.
Yeah, if I can add, I think I don't have the explanation either on the lean. The rationale of the electrolyte imbalance is it's pretty simple. I'm a cell biologist, by the way.
Sweet.
Any cellular function is related to concentration of ion in the extracellular matrix, and you could easily imagine that some muscle would trigger or would be tied from just local imbalance. So I think that's why one of the reason is that. But similarly, I mean, we attribute electrolyte imbalance as a cause of almost anything. Some people will say hallucination is because of that. Some people will say GI issue is because of that. And like at some point, it's like if anyone has a problem, they say electrolyte imbalance, and like that's it. So I think weak muscle definitely contribute. But my story with the oblique, before one race, I actually, in the car, that was so lame. I only have lame accident, but I was sleeping in my car and I kind of reached out for my alarm clock and did a weird movement. And I strained my oblique muscle. Like, I don't know the exact name, but super painful. And then I ran my 100K. It was excruciatingly painful. And you don't really realize how much you use these muscle until you have a strain there. And then it was like, wow, like these muscles are really important. That was particularly obvious on a trail where you kind of have to stabilize a little bit, and you don't notice because you're able to stabilize, like to not lean because of these muscle. And that race was a nightmare. So now I try to have core training and oblique, within the core. I mean, my mind is kind of all the same. Like it's kind of my gut muscle. It's not just sit up, but it's everything around there. It's definitely important, no question there. So
Absolutely. Question for you. So, as a cellular biologist, why do you think it would be more like one side than the other?
I think it would be just a local thing. I think you would have a local imbalance. Like it's not necessarily in the blood that you would have such an imbalance in electrolyte. I think you would have so many problems if that reached that. But I think
Sure.
locally, you will have an imbalance. The lymph is not drained as properly, and because of that, that's why one specific muscle is having a cramp or something. Cramps are probably related to
Yeah.
electrolyte imbalance. I think there's a lot of people that believe that. So it would be similar to a cramp. It's just you lose a little bit of control over the contraction of that muscle, or the muscle is contracting or firing specifically because of that. But why is it not everything? I mean, same thing with a cramp. Why is it there specifically and not everywhere in your body? It's probably kind of a local imbalance. But
Yeah, that makes
yeah,
sense. I guess it'd be more like, why would it be like right side oblique and not both of them? Would be my
yeah,
question. But I mean, I guess it could just be postural or
yeah.
anything.
But to kind of follow your train of thought a little bit, if someone is always leaning, always on the right side, always in the same way, to me that definitely signaled that this is not a systemic thing, that this is more local thing and local muscle.
Interesting.
But it could be many things. Like it could be weak muscle, but it could also be that your gait is not proper, and that somehow because your gait is not symmetrical, then you're overexerting a specific muscle, and because of that, that's the issue. So yes, strengthening would help, but probably working on your gait could help too. So it's hard to diagnose like that. Like there might be also different cause for different lean or different people.
No, for sure. I think that makes a ton of sense. I have a torn hip labrum on the right side, and as a result, like my gait's a little weird, and it's the thing I always have to watch out for. And I will end up with certain cramps on the right side due to that because they're always kind of working harder. So yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. But I really appreciate that in your list. I already forgot the full list, but I think 3 out of the 5 were not legs, or were not kind of lower body. And I think that's something that most runners like, I don't need anything but my legs. I'll do squats, I'll do calf raise, I'll like toe raise, I'll do steps, and like that's it. Maybe one core exercise, just because Simon said it's important, and then you totally forget about the rest.
It's plank, right? I mean, just plank.
Always plank.
Always plank.
Plank as
I
long
like a
as
flutter
possible.
kick.
You're a flutter kicker.
I am a flutter kicker. I strongly believe in the flutter kick because I move my legs, so it kind of makes sense, right? Rationally, I can accept
Do you
that.
do? Can we blame the ultra lean on awesome sauce? Can we do that?
I mean, we can do whatever we want. It's your show.
I'm not yet jumped on the bandwagon of bashing them, and by the time this episode comes out, I think people will have forgotten about it, so it's fine.
God, what a fiasco. Before I forget, I wanted to get back to a thing. Yes, I like really do believe in training the full body, and some of this goes back to that idea that strength training is not just for your race; it's for your general health, right? Like just like I would tell a bodybuilder to do cardio, like you hit it from both ends. But it's not just that. It's also, I think we lose this idea that we are an entire human being and we work holistically as a unit, right? Like if you don't have some level of overhead shoulder extension, then your lats actually don't work very well. And if your lats don't work very well, then you can't actually stay upright because your back is constantly here. And if you're here, then your low back hurts and then our legs can't really do our job because we're just in pain, right? So this idea that we're nothing but lungs and legs, I do think it's a little overplayed. There is a functional aspect to it where if we train the upper body to be not necessarily bigger, like I look the way I do partially because it's an aesthetic thing. I like partially because I climb rocks a lot. So some of this is just to help me get up rocks bigger. And then like some of it is I really enjoy being in the gym, but You don't need to like have a bunch of muscle mass to be strong, as we started out with.
Yeah.
So if you're stronger on the upper body, it helps your legs.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree with that. I think it's funny because a lot of us got into running or sports in general to be healthier, and it seems that we're almost losing sight of that at some point, where you're trying to be a faster marathoner and it's like, oh, I gotta lose weight, and no, upper body, like, come on, like, are you kidding me? Like, I don't need that extra weight. But you got into running to be healthy, and being healthy means having some strength, not necessarily, like you say, not necessarily being bulky, but being strong matters. And I think I've seen many studies that health when you're older definitely is associated to how much muscle mass you had at, and I can't remember the age, but like you clearly see the decline of muscle mass, and that's one of the best predictor of, will you break a hip and die like at whatever age? If you start from low muscle mass, you're gonna struggle. So if you get too obsessed about it, and I think that's where we're saying also with the pro level, like none of us are pro, and I think none of our viewers are pro, but if you are, let us know below. But we're not pros, but we want to have a healthy life, and healthy life means to be a well-rounded individual. So 100% with
It,
you. I mean, not that I don't skip it. Like, I'll be honest. I'm always honest with my people. I don't do it. I think I should do it, and I think it's good that you recommend it, and I think people should do it. I don't do it, but I know it's a mistake. Like, I know it.
That's important.
I want to touch on two things, Will. One of them's my own personal experience. It is sort of summer here in Colorado, finally at the high country, and I had to start my lawnmower like 2 weeks ago. Actually, just after Cocodona, I had to start my lawnmower, and so thinking about like strength training, like I just ripped like my shoulder apart trying to start this lawnmower from sitting all winter, and that's where I was thinking I need the strength training. I could run 100+ miles on no strength training because I'm so specific in what I do in running that I can muscle through it literally. But it's life. You're right. Like the holding the grandkids up over the head and all those things, right? It's life. I completely just shredded my shoulder trying to start this lawnmower. I did eventually get it started and mowed the lawn, but I shredded my shoulder and it was mowing the lawn. Right, it had nothing to do with ultra running. So it's just life, and it's funny because Simon's openly admitting that he doesn't do it, and I'm pretty bad at doing it myself, but and I do it in pieces, and I think I got it from you, and I'm pretty sure that you're the promoter of this, or one of the promoters of this concept. Is my weights happen to be just over here, and as I walk by them to go get more water, get a drink, use the restroom, I'll pick up a couple of weights and do some sort of exercise, and it only lasts like 2 minutes. 2-3 minutes, and then I'll put it down. I'll go do my business, whatever. Get my water, refilling my water, letting the dog out and letting the dog in. And the next time I go by it, I'll pick up different weights and do a different exercise. But I'm getting pieces of it throughout the whole day. And I think that you were the one that introduced me to that concept of I don't have to go to the gym and dedicate 30 minutes to strength training. It'd be great if I could, but I don't have to.
Yeah, you absolutely don't have to. In some ways, it's actually more effective if you don't, because you get more recovery. And yeah, probably what you saw that from me. I will give credit where credit's due. Where I heard this was from, where does he currently coach? UT Austin. He is the basketball coach there, but he was the strength coach at Stanford. And he had these like collegiate, and I think he worked for the Suns for a while too. So like collegiate and NBA athletes training all through season. And they were like PRing their lifts in playoffs. And it's because they would do like 5 reps or like 2 sets of a power movement. And then they would go to practice, and then they would finish and they would do like 10 minutes of another thing. Right. So they were like lifting 3 or 4 times a day throughout their practice sign. But like at each time, it was really short. He calls them exercise snacks, but it was really short. And as a result, he ended up making all these guys really strong. They're incredibly durable. They could train power movements like 7 days a week. And they just became incredibly strong athletes and they probably aggregated more time in the gym or lifting over the week. but at any one time it was really short, so they never really got that fatigue, so they could train really hard every day as well.
Yeah, definitely. It was definitely the snacks. I do remember it now. Yeah, you did it as a reel or something along those lines.
Yeah, it sounds right. I think I've heard this from Steve Magnus too. I think I heard him talking with John Marcus on their coaching podcast, and I think they're starting to do some of that stuff too. I think it's starting to happen at NAU. I think Marcus is doing this up in Oregon, but I think this is starting to kind of take shape because of how well it worked for Corey. So I think if you have the access is more than anything there. Like if you have the access to what you need for an equipment, that might not be that much. It can be incredibly effective and not take that long. I have a few athletes who train that way.
And out of curiosity, so when you would do that, would you shuffle through the muscle group that you do? Because it comes back to a little bit the point that you said before, and that's me not understanding, I suppose, but you were saying, well, don't do 200 or 300 times the same thing. That means, add weight or something, basically, and don't do it every day. Like, you need to spread it. But at the same time, the snack concept seems to be, well, a little bit before training, like practice, and afterwards you do it again and then again. And I'm trying to grasp the notion of how often should I train a muscle group? What should be the weight or the number of repeat that I should aim for? Like, I don't think a one max effort is necessarily what you want to do if you don't want to bulk up. But, maybe it's 3 times 15 is what I'm typically aiming for personally, but curious to hear your take on these things. I know it's a lot of questions within one, so.
No, it's all right. So in order, we do tend to split them, right? So if I were going to do something like this, you might do 3 sets of deadlift on a Monday, and then you might do 3 sets of squats on a Tuesday, and then you might do 3 sets of a push on a Wednesday, right? So you'd split them up like that throughout your week, and you can kind of pair them a little bit. So it's pretty short. And then you hit everything at least once, maybe twice in a week. And that's how that'd be separated. So it's not like you're doing deadlifts every day. You're cycling through them so that you can still get that larger stimulus. But by the end of the week, you've kind of hit everything in some way or another. Because those guys are lifting 3 times, they'll hit very specific things. So they'll do power cleans or jerks or whatever. It's basketball players, so they're 7 feet tall. So they're actually usually doing a clean with a trap bar because it's really safe for someone who looks like an alien. But if you aren't that level and not trying to do this 3 times throughout the day, you can just split it up really easy. And then for the weight stuff, I don't really recommend most people ever do a 1 rep max unless you just want to know. It's a massive stimulus on the body. You're going to need a couple days at least to recover from it. It's kind of like, trying to go PR your mile. It's a rough time and just not real very good training adaptation. That said, different rep ranges or hitting a level of effort in a rep range does different things. So no matter what, if you're trying to create an adaptation, you need to make the lifting hard. So if you've been lifting the same weight in the same movement for the past 3 years, then you're probably not doing a lot because it's been no new stimulus, right? So eventually, if I'm overhead pressing, I'll probably start like this, and eventually it's going to kind of slow down. And then eventually I'm going to have to deviate and form to get that thing over me. And the last one is not great because it puts my shoulder at risk. Probably 2 or 3 reps before that was hard enough to where we're pushing an adaptation, right? That's the kind of difficulty we're looking for. When we get to that significant slowdown point where I physically can't make it move faster anymore, we're probably hitting a good target. Now, if you are, and this is a spectrum, kind of like heart rate zones. It's not like heart rate zone 150 and then 151, something entirely different. Same idea here. But in general, low reps for heavy weights. So we might say 1 to 6. And again, a 1 rep max is probably silly, but we might say 1 to 6 is probably just pure strength adaptation. This is going to work a lot on your central and peripheral nervous system. It teaches your body to work as a whole. I actually really like to put runners through this at least once or twice throughout a year for a pretty short period of time, because if you I don't know, my deadlift is in the few hundreds of pounds. And as a result, like my body really has to be able to work as a unit in order to pick up that weight. It's not just my glutes. It's not just my hamstrings. It's everything from my neck down to my feet, and that is like picking up that weight. And it actually tends to be that rep range that doesn't build a ton of size. It makes you very strong, but it doesn't actually put on a ton of muscle mass, because at the end of the day, you're just not really aggregating enough what we would call volume. Volume in the strength world is kind of like mileage, but it's like reps by sets by weight, right? And if we just calculate that, you have a number that we'd qualify as volume. And low rep heavy weight doesn't tend to be that much volume. It's just hard, and it teaches your body to move as a unit. And then we end up in this like, it's been 8 to 12 or 10 or 3 by 10 or 6 to 15 or something like that. But anywhere in the 6 to 15 range is where we're probably going to put on a ton of muscle mass. This is why you see a lot of people doing like 3 or 4 sets of 10 in the gym. And this is because you can put on a ton of volume there. And you're able to move a good amount of weight for a good amount of reps for quite a few sets, and you're not going to create that much fatigue. So this is where, and it's not tearing the muscles apart. What actually creates muscle size is tension. It's mechanical tension, which signals a bunch of shit in your body. And you can aggregate enough volume there to where you will end up with bigger muscles over the years, right? It's not going to be a quick process. I do tell people who are worried about getting big that try it and you won't, and then you'll be stronger and you still won't be bigger, because people take like years time, eat an insane amount of food and some other substances in order to put on an insane amount of muscle mass. Like, it's actually a really difficult thing to do, especially for females. It's just tough. So give it a shot and see how it goes. You probably won't get huge. And then if we look at like 15 to probably 30 is where we'd hit that upper rep range. We're actually targeting what we might call more the pump. Transient sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, if we're going to get really nerdy about it, but just like blood flow and other stuff in your muscles, like that is getting bigger. And this is where if you do 20 bicep curls, your bicep's going to gain like a half an inch of size on it. And then it will deflate again like 30 minutes later, but it looks really cool immediately. And that's what these higher rep ranges tend to do. So if we're really trying to get strong, we want heavy, low reps. If we want more muscle mass, we might be more in the middle. And then if we want a bunch of blood flow or just to like practice a movement, we might be a little higher. And all of these have value. Some of the downsides is the upper end is not going to make you a ton stronger. You'll feel your muscles, but you're not necessarily going to get a lot stronger. And the downside to the lower end is it puts a stupid amount of stress on your joints and tendons. So what a lot of like there has never been a power lifter whose elbow doesn't hurt. It just does. They bench press really heavy almost every week or every 2 weeks. And as a result, their elbow kind of hurts. And same if you're going to do like really heavy squats. So this is why I'll like push that for like 3 weeks in an off season for a runner and then pull back. It's a very short thing that I tend to have people do.
That's a great explanation. I really appreciate that, Will.
No worries.
I think that'll resonate with anyone that's trying to figure out exactly the numbers and reps and what they're trying to use the purpose for.
Thanks, man. And I'd say the one thing I didn't really touch on, we hear a lot about plyometrics, right? So plyometrics are strength training. They're explosive. They're powerful. This is a thing that I think studies been shifting a little bit, and I need to adjust a couple of my materials that I put out to the public because I'm kind of updating my opinions on some of these things. But let's say like a box jump where you're jumping on top of a box. Low rep, probably 5. 5 is probably the highest you need to do. You're not trying to do it to be tired. You're trying to do it to create power. And we're probably stopping somewhere in the 5, maybe 8 range. It depends on which one. So if we're talking like an ice skater, that's also a plyometric. It's what we call a low-level plyometric. That responds to a little higher volume. But these really powerful big movements like box jumps, we probably want to have like 5 reps and lower. And then for something like an ice skater or a one-leg hop or any of that stuff, you might be in the like 12 to 20 range. But I tend to do some more explosive plyometric stuff like 4 to 6 weeks out from race day. because it helps build that pop. It's not particularly stressful on the body if you get your rep ranges right, from a joints and tendons perspective. So you can kind of peak volume while you keep stress in the gym low, but helps reinforce that power so you can get more out.
Sorry, and when you say you'll need to adapt the material that you've put out, you mean that now it's the growing body of evidence is supporting that type of exercise?
So we've had support for plyos for a long time. I don't think there was a solid consensus on how many reps for some of these like higher level plyometrics that we were supposed to do. So some of the materials I have out, I think I have you doing like 12 box jumps, which is just too many. So I need to punch a couple numbers differently. But yeah, other than that, it's not particularly new. It's just not seeing for the higher level stuff. For the lower level stuff, we're working more like fatigue resistance, where for the higher stuff, we're working for more actual power. And we're just not going to create power for 12 reps. So that's all.
Yeah, that was great. Really informative, Will. We appreciate your time. And I have your website pulled up here. It's Mountain Goat Endurance Coaching. It's willfrantz.com. Where else can we find you at? And how about you give us the spelling for Will Frantz as well?
Sure. Will is like Will, and Frantz is Frantz. And let's see. Since this is a podcast, if you want another podcast to listen to, I have one called Trail and Ultra Running Training. You were on that fairly recently, and should definitely go listen to Brian's episode. It was great. And I have an Instagram, will.c.frantz, and then my website, as you said. That's about it. I'm not too much elsewhere.
Yeah, you're really deep in the podcast world. I think you're at like 140 or so, right? 140 episodes or so?
I think we're about to hit 150. Like, I don't know. I just stand in front of a microphone and talk for 10 to 20 minutes. They're not all interviews, so it does help.
It's great. It's great content, though. I love it, actually.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, and it was really awesome to be on your show, and I appreciate it as well.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it was fun having you.
Well, again, thanks for your time, Will. I hope our listeners, if they have extra questions about strength and conditioning and ultra running and all those things, will hit you up and find you in those locales.
Yeah, if you have any questions on strength work, like I answer them all day long, DM me on Instagram. I'm happy to chat with you, absolutely.
Thanks, Will. Have a great evening. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, guys. You too.
Thanks, Will. I'm Simon, and that's Brian.
We'd be thrilled to connect with you beyond our show.
For all of your endurance coaching requirement, you can reach out to Coach Brian at altitudeendurancecoaching.com.
To explore more of Simon's content, visit Running with Simon on YouTube.
Don't forget to rate, like, and share our content regularly.
Your support means a lot to us. Thanks.